I hardly know where to begin because, of course, last week the new session of the United Nations opened and absolutely everything was on the table. You had that dramatic Security Council meeting involving international terrorism and the bombings in northern Iraq against ISIL. It was chaired by President Obama. There was the continuing consternation and concern about the acceleration of Ebola in West Africa. There was a separate session on United Nations peacekeeping. There was a side event on HIV and AIDS. There was a side event on the 20th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development, which was held in Cairo in 1994. I remember it well. I happened to be there, where we tried to define women's need for contraception and family planning in the context of sexual and reproductive rights. And yet, 20 years later, there are still over 200 million women of reproductive age who do not have access to family planning methods. And there was, of course, in addition to those various interventions, the parade of presidents and prime ministers, puffed up like popinjays. How do you like that for alliterative excess, who came to the podium of the General Assembly to describe what they were doing in their individual countries. But there was one item which is worthy of particular note. On Tuesday, September 23rd, after marches of hundreds of thousands of people around the world on the weekend, there was the special session, the summit so-called, on climate change. It was meant to be the precursor to negotiations next year to achieve an international convention or an international treaty on climate change in Paris. And all day, countries came forward and talked about what they were doing about climate change. The penultimate speech was delivered by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, who deemed the day an unqualified success. The last speech of the day, however, was made by Graça Machel. She was, of course, styled as Nelson Mandela's widow. She is a phenomenon in her own right, and Graça, with great courage, said what had to be said. I'm paraphrasing, but effectively she said the day was a bust. That the gap between the consequences of climate change and the response to it from the international community was an unbridgeable gap and would have great implications, catastrophic implications for children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. The day was a travesty. It was filled with fatuous generalities. The best speech of the day was made by Barack Obama, who seemed to be serious and took on a position of leadership. But then he did the same thing in Copenhagen, the last set of negotiations back in 2009, and when he got to Copenhagen, he finked out completely. I don't know what to expect. As a matter of fact, if I was a religious person, I'd probably be praying for the planet. You know, back in 2009, the industrial countries promised $100 billion a year from 2012 to 2020 to mitigate the consequences of climate change for developing countries. On Tuesday, September 23rd, they pledged $2.3 billion. That's less than 1/4 of 1% of the total required. Pathetic and terrifying for the future of humankind. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.